theyeshiva.net.
Okay, Daf Beis Amud Beis. Welcome everybody. Where are we? We are Keshushan. Okay, the wide lines, Daf Beis Amud Beis, the second half of the page, the wide lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 lines from the top of the wide lines. So when the wide lines begin, go down 6 lines. We're holding by the words. I'm sorry. 3 lines. Daf Beis Amud Beis, 3 lines from the wide lines after the word Keshushan. Keshushan. Okay, let's recall what the discussion in this sugya was. The Gemarah is trying to figure out how it came about that all of the cities that have a wall from the time of Yehoshua, you have to read the Megillah not on Yudalad Adar but on Tesvav Adar. That's the discussion. So the Megillah doesn't say it clearly. The Megillah just says that in all of the regions of Achashverosh, the Jews rested on Yudalad. They fought on Yud Gimel, they rested on Yudalad. And in Shushan, the battle continued for another day, and they rested on Tesvav. And the Megillah concludes, Al Kain, therefore, the Jews who live in open cities celebrate Purim on Yudalad. But it doesn't give the second half of it, which is what Jews who don't live in open cities do. So Rava said, we deduce. The logic is, okay, the open cities, they do Yudalad, so we finish the pasuk on our own, and we say that if you don't live in an open city, you live in a walled city, you do it on Tesvav. Why are we choosing the word Tesvav? Because the Megillah says that in Shushan, they celebrated on Tesvav. And later the Megillah says that Mordechai did send a letter to all the Jews telling them to celebrate the 2 days Yudalad and Tesvav. So therefore, we're just using a little bit of our logic to finish the sentences that the Megillah is not explicit about. That is what Rava told us. And the Gemarah debated and excavated the words of Rava and tried this alternative and that alternative and that alternative. I wanted to say maybe in walled cities they Bechal didn't do a Purim. Maybe Bechal no Purim. Like, how do you know there is? Maybe only in Shushan they celebrate the 15th. The Gemarah rejects that because they're part of Klal Yisrael. The Gemarah thought maybe in the walled cities you could do Yudalad and Tesvav. Maybe that's an option. That's rejected. Maybe in walled cities you have a choice. You could do either 14 or 15. That's rejected. Finally, the Gemarah says maybe in the walled cities they did it on the 13th. Maybe that's the day for the Megillah, on the 13th of Adar, and the 15th is only for Shushan. Maybe that's the case. Maybe they have their day 13, and the Gemarah said that doesn't make sense because you're going to compare them to Shushan. Meaning, since the Megillah doesn't say clearly when they read the Megillah in fortified cities, to make a new day, Yud Gimel Adar, would be a far stretch. Rather, the Megillah says that everywhere they did Yudalad, they celebrated Purim on Yudalad. Shushan, they celebrated Purim on Tesvav. So it would seem that those who lived in walled cities should do the same as Shushan and not to create a new day that is not mentioned at all in the Megillah. Now, of course, this also makes sense because Shushan had a wall. Shushan had a wall. It was the capital and it had a wall around it. So the cities that are surrounded by a wall are being put into the same category of Shushan. And therefore, Shushan does the Megillah on the 15th, and we assume that all the cities that have a wall, even though the Megillah doesn't say it clearly, should also do it on that day, just like Shushan. That's how the discussion developed. So the Gemarah says, okay, fine, we settled it. At last we settled it. Open cities, Yud Gimel, Yudalad, and walled cities, Tesvav. Asiya Ashkechan. Ashkechan Asiya. Schira Minalan. But wait, if you look at those psukim in the Megillah, it speaks about Asiya. But how do you know Schira? What do I mean? Asiya means action. Schira means remembering. There's 2 aspects of Purim. One are the mitzvahs that we do with action, like the meal, like sending gifts to friends, like giving charity to the poor. And then there's the other mitzvah, which is about remembering the day, which is Kriyas HaMegillah, reading the Megillah or listening to it. That's called Schira, because it's not an action. You're not doing something. It's either you're doing it with your mouth or you're passively listening with your ears. That's called Schira. We'll soon see why he uses the word Schira, remembering. In the Megillah, it says that the Jews who live in open cities, they celebrate the 14th of Adar as a day of joy, as a day of feasting, as a day of Yom Tov, as a day of sending gifts to their friends. That we know. But Schira Minalan. But how do you know that the reading of the Megillah in the open cities is Yudalid and in the walled cities is Tes Vav? What's the source for that? There's no mention in the Megillah of that. The Megillah speaks about the feasting, the Suda, the Mishloach Manos, Yudalid in open cities, and we deduce that in fortified cities, it's Tesvav. But how do you know about the Schira Megillah, the reading of the Megillah? That's the question that the Gemarah now asks. Schira Minalan, how do you know that the time of Schira in the open cities is Yudalid and in the walled cities is Tesvav? Perhaps the reading of the Megillah is everywhere Yudalid. Perhaps that's the case. There's a difference between Yudalid and Tesvav in different aspects of Purim. But maybe the reading of the Megillah is everywhere Yudalid. I mean, that's how Rabbi Charanel explains the question of the Gemarah. Or maybe even in the open cities. How do you know it's Yudalid? The Megillah is not clear about that. The Megillah is mamash not clear. Rashi says, Schira kriyas ha-Megillah minalan shenikvelem zman leprozim barba asar. Habahai krada al keina yudim ha-prozim ha-yoshim bari ha-prozis oisim ha-sem barba asar. Asiyahu diksiva. Only Asiyah is discussed. So the Gemarah answers, Amar Kra, the Pasuk says in the Megillah, V'ayamim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. These days of Purim are remembered every year and practiced every year. Niskarim. Itzker schira l'asiyah. In this verse, he compares, juxtaposes, brings together remembering with action. Meaning that the reading of the Megillah, which is schira, what does it mean? Hayam melon is skarim v'nasim. These days we remember and we do. What does it mean we remember and we do? There's two obligations here. On these days, the first thing is we have to remember. What does it mean remember? How do I remember things? What do I remember? We read the Megillah. When I read the Megillah, I remember. Everybody remembers the story because we read it every single year. We listen to it. That's Niskar. What's V'nasim? V'nasim is we also have to do things on this day, not just hear the Megillah, hear the story and remember. I could sit on my chair, read the story and remember it. No, I also have to do things. Whether it's a meal, whether it's Mishloach Manos, whether it's giving tzedakah to the poor, those are the three mitzvahs of Purim. V'ayamim elon Niskarim v'nasim are these two mitzvahs. And what do we see? They're compared to each other. Niskarim is with V'nasim, Nasim is with Niskarim. So that means the day that I do the acts of Purim, feasting, joy, meals, etc., is the same day that I do Niskarim. And thus, since the Pasuk clearly says that in the open cities, they practice the mitzvahs of Purim, Mishta, Simcha, Yom Tov, Mishloach Manos on Yudalit, and we deduce that in the fortified cities on Tesvav, so this applies equally to the reading of the Megillah.
But there is a better Pasuk. It says,
Right. But in that pasuk, doesn't speak about time. It just says the Jews committed themselves to both of these things. No, he's not asking how we know to read the Megillah. That's not his question. How do we know that the reading of the Megillah should be applied to the same day that we apply the other mitzvahs of Purim? That's what he says, because it says, V'ayamim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. And these days, niskarim now. So we compare the niskarim to the nasim. It's not a general question on how we know we read the Megillah. Pasuk Chavches, Perik Tes, Pasuk Chavches, V'ayamim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. It's a long pasuk. V'chol dar v'dar, mishpacha, medina, ir v'ir, v'yimei ha'purim el yavrim metoicha Yehudim v'zichim le'yosef mizara. It's basically about the annual practice of Purim. Says the Gemarah, Masnisin the Loiki Haitana, our Mishnah, which maintained a fascinating law that any city that had a wall from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, you read the Megillah on Tesvav Adar, our Mishnah does not follow the view of a specific Tanya. The Tanya, we have a Braisa. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chaim, Rabbi Yeshua the son of Karcha says, Krachin amokafin chaimim mimois achashveirish kaiden b'chamisha. Only cities that have a wall from the days of Achashverosh read on the 15th of Adar. The fact that you had a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, but now you don't have a wall, will not help you. So I only look at one qualification. During the time of the story of Purim, did my city have a wall? That would exclude Yerushalayim. It would exclude Akko, would exclude any city in Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael that had a Yericha, that had a wall during Yeshua ben Nun. But now, after the Churban, remember this happens after the Churban of Bayis Rishon, only a few decades afterwards. So Jerusalem and the rest of Judea and Eretz Yisrael was desolate, or at least largely desolate. The Babylonian emperor breached and destroyed many of the walls. None of them would suit this qualification of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. On the other hand, many new cities would. If they had a wall by Achashverosh, but they didn't have a wall by Yeshua ben Nun, according to our Mishnah, it's a completely different equation. I only look if you had a wall 1,000 years ago. And what if for 900 years you don't have a wall? I don't care. We still read on Tesvav. On the other hand, you can have a wall for 700 years, strong. But if you didn't have a wall by Yeshua ben Nun, you're not counted. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, no, I don't agree. By the way, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, according to many opinions, was the son of Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva is called Kireach, which means bald. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is called Rabbi Yeshua, the son of the bald one. So many opinions hold that he was a son of Rabbi Akiva. He was certainly a student of Rabbi Akiva and a colleague of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Just mentioning that. My time at Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, what's his logic? Actually, his logic is very clear. Kishushan. He says, it's just like Shushan. Ma Shushan mokefes chem meisa chashverosh v'keina b'chamish asar. Av kol shem mokefes chem meisa chashverosh keina b'chamish asar. Shushan had a wall around it from the days of Achashverosh. We don't know that it had a wall from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. I mean, maybe, but it's not something we can assume on our own. That 1,000 years before Achashverosh, approximately 900 years, Shushan had a wall. We can't. We have no evidence. So Rabbi Yeshua, no, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is saying, the whole idea of reading the Megillah on Tesvav originates where? In Shushan, because they celebrated on the 15th, because they continued the war on Yudalid. So if that's the premise, you compare the copy to the original. Ma Shushan mukefes chem meisa chashverosh v'keina b'chamish asar av kol shem mukefes chem meisa chashverosh keina b'chamish asar. Any city that had a wall during the time of Achashverosh gets to read the Megillah Chamish Asar. In other words, when the Chachamim made the celebration of Purim, and they told Shushan, you do Tesvav because the original year, that's when you partied. And everybody else do Yudalid because the original year, that's when you did it. They decided to do one more thing, and that is to give Shushan company. Which company, who gets to be company with everybody else? Rishon ben Karcha says it's simple logic. Any city that looks like Shushan and has the same format like Shushan gets Tesvav. I explained in last year a very important idea of the Ramban, right? That there was a special reason they did this, because the Jews in the fortified cities did not have the same experience of Purim like the Jews in the open cities. Their anxiety wasn't as profound, their celebration wasn't as profound, and when the Jews started to celebrate Purim on their own, they were not celebrating. The open cities were celebrating. They were not celebrating, or at least not celebrating so much, which is why the Gemarah had a Havam in the beginning of the Sugya that fortified cities don't have Purim B'chlal. Right? It was a thought in the Gemarah, a fascinating thought, that maybe Jews in fortified cities don't have. The fact is that the Megillah stops in the middle. It interrupts itself in the middle of a sentence. It says the Jews in open cities celebrate Yudalid, and it somehow does not want to finish that sentence, which is always, as I told you, an omission in Tanakh is very significant. It's almost like giving a little lamentation about the Jews in the fortified cities. So when they decided that everybody should celebrate Purim, they gave the open cities their own unique day, their own unique celebration, and excluded everybody else. And the Jews in the walled cities, that's why the Gemarah thought the Jews in the walled cities maybe get Yud Gimel, maybe they Bechlal need their own day. They get actually the time of war, not the time of celebration. At the conclusion was no, we put them in the category of Shushan, and we compare them to Shushan in the sense that they read the Megillah on Tesvav. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, okay, I like this, but if that's the case, do it like Shushan. When did Shushan get a wall? Not by Yeshua. We don't. Whenever it got, but by the Achashverosh it had a wall. That should be the qualification. If your city had a wall during the time of Achashverosh, you're like Shushan. If not, not. So you tell me you had a wall 1,000 years ago, but now you didn't have a wall. What's that helps me? You're considered an open city. On the other hand, if you had a wall 1,000 years ago, now you don't have a wall. Why are you like Shushan? Why are you like Shushan? And the logic is very profound when we think about the whole concept. If you had a wall in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, but now you don't have a wall, it didn't protect you now. It may have protected you. If the Jews in Yerushalayim weren't more protected than anybody else, they didn't have a wall. So who cares that you once had a wall 1,000 years ago? It's irrelevant. The whole point is that they're different because they had walls. So therefore, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's opinion is completely not like our Mishnah. He says it has nothing to do with Yeshua ben Nun. It's a very practical thing. If you have a wall now, good. If not, not. That's it. You agree with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha? Okay. I'm sure he would be happy to hear what you have to say.
Now the whole Eretz Yisrael has a wall. Iron Dome.
Vitana did on my time. What about the Tan of our Mishnah? What's his reason to do it according to Yeshua ben Nun, to disagree with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha? The answer is Yalif Pirazi Pirazi. Fascinatingly, he derives it from the comparison of the two words Pirazi Pirazi. This is a principle called Gzeirah Shava. Now I know some of you know what Gzeirah Shava is, but even those who know it often don't have it really clear, and some people don't know what it is, so I'm going to explain it very briefly. A Gzeirah Shava, in contemporary language, is called copy-paste. Copy-paste, okay? When the Torah was dictated, we take a look and we see. There's a word here in one area, the same word is used somewhere else. We don't say it's the same word used somewhere else. We say there was a copy-paste. Meaning, it's almost like the word was transplanted from the first place into the second place. And what that does for us is, why is that so important? It means that the laws that apply to the first scenario can also be pasted into the second scenario when applicable. That's the concept of a Gzeirah Shava. And that's, and vice versa, if it's applicable. That's the general principle of Gzeirah Shava. Now, you don't have this in other literature. You're not going to open up a text of literature loud and say, oh, there's a word in the first chapter, and there's a word in the 98th chapter, and therefore all the realities of the first chapter go in here. I mean, in a storybook obviously doesn't apply, but even in a law book, this is a unique phenomenon. It's a unique formula in the Tanakh, which only could come about because the choice of words was beyond meticulous. It was so precise, the choice of words, that you could say, if this word was chosen here, and this word was placed somewhere else, copy-paste. It's not just
words, but dates.
Or dates, yeah. So the Tana Kama, our Tana of the Mishnah, says, this is what's happening here. In the Mishnah, in the Megillah, it says, Al Kain HaYehudim HaProzim HaYoshvim Ba'orei HaProzos. Interesting words. Now, there's also a redundancy here. Al Kain HaYehudim HaProzim HaYoshvim Ba'orei HaProzos. Translation, the Jews who are open, who sit in the open cities. No need for that. You could have said, Al Kain HaYehudim HaYoshvim Ba'orei HaProzos. The Jews who dwell in open cities. It's fine. Prozim means open, like Prozis Teshav Yerushalayim. Jerusalem will be open, a pasuk in Schaya. Prozis means open, because when you're open, you're scattered, like Rashi says, Mefoizer, right? It could have said, Al-Kaina Yehudim HaYoshim, what are Yehudim HaProzim? The open Jews. They're open-minded Jews. What's mean open Jews? They're not open Jews. Their cities don't have walls. Al-Kaina Yehudim. So you have the word prozim, which is superfluous. So the Gemarah says, Yalef Prazi Prazi. There's a comparison between Prazi and Prazi. Ksiv ha'achal keina Yehudim ha'prozim oisim esem arba'asa l'chayder shader. Uksiv hasam, it says there, what's there? There is Parshas Dvarim. Peri Gimel Pasuk Hey, when the Jews are entering into the land of Eretz Yisrael, they're finishing their journey in the desert, 40 years. And they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael in the days of Moshe and Yeshua. And he speaks about the places that they conquered on the way to the Holy Land. Levad me arei haprizi, haprazi, harbe ma'oid. The full pasuk is that they conquered cities which have big walls, psuris chaim, magvoyad, lasayim, uvriach, walls and bars. Levad me arei haprazi, harbe ma'oid. In addition to the unfortified cities, open cities, many of them. Nu. So you have there prazi. I took out the word mukefes chaim because Rashi says to take it out. Just like in Dvarim, you're talking about cities that were open from the days of Yeshua. Here too. Meaning, our Tana is saying a fascinating thing. When it says a Jew who lives in an open city, an open Jew, prozi, reads the Megillah on Yudalid, what's the definition of prozi? So I go to Parshas Dvarim. It says there prozi. What was the definition over there? The days of Moshe and Yeshua. Moshe and Yeshua could say this is an open city because there's no wall. So when the Megillah, I take that prozi, I transplant it to the Megillah, Gzeirah Shava, and I say, what's pshat an open city in the time of the Megillah Esther? That Moshe says it's an open city. Yeshua says it's an open city. But what if Moshe and Yeshua would say it's not an open city? It wouldn't be considered an open city in the Megillah. What if it was destroyed 100 years after Yeshua, but by Purim it was open? They wouldn't say it's an open city. They would say it's a fortified city, because in the days of Yeshua it was fortified, so it's not prazi. So the definition of prazi has to be prazi from Parshas Dvarim. What's prazi, Parshas Dvarim? Yeshua says it's open, because it's open in his days, which gives me two laws. If it was open in the days of Yeshua, even though now it's fortified, it's considered prazi, and I'll read the Megillah on Yudal. Or conversely, if it had a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, and now it's unfortified, it's considered fortified. Why? Because it's not called prazi, even though physically it's open. But the word prazi in the Megillah, I'm transplanting, I'm borrowing, I'm deducing from the word prazi in Parshas Dvarim.
But the events in Yehoshua don't compare to the events in Shushan on that day.
No, it was definition. Yirei Prozim, Yirei Choma.
So the big question is if this is a classic Zeir Shava or it's not. Some Rishonim, it seems from Rashi that it's a classic Zeir Shava. Others say that it's not a classic. The Ritva says that since it's Nevi'im and Ksuvim, Megillah is Ksuvim, so you can't have the classic Zeir Shava because this is not the Torah that was written by Moshe. This is written by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, right? So could you still use that classic Zeir Shava or not? Some say it's a classic, some say it's only an explanation of what prazi is. But the Chidush Yoran adds what I said before, that Al-Keina Yehudim HaPrazim are superfluous. It should have said Al-Keina Yehudim HaYoshrim Bari HaPrazis. The words Al-Keina Yehudim HaPrazim are completely superfluous. So he believes that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah put in those words to tell you what our definition is. Now, this is only definitions. Now the question is, what would be the logic of this? That's a Gewaldige question. This is not logic. This is just, you want to know what prazi is? I'll tell you what prazi is. But why? Why? What's the... Rabbi Yeshua ben Karch is right compared to Shushan. What's the logic? That he's not discussing here. He's just discussing the definition.
No, but it makes a lot of sense because it said Al-Kena Yedim HaProzim. It said, what did it mean that Yedim HaProzim? Ayoshim Be'erei Prozim. What means Yirei Prozim?
Okay, good. Yeah. So that we have the definition of prazi.
It looks like a classic Zeir Shava.
Okay, fine.
You said that Ramban said that the tent covered.
Yeah. That was the issue. That the Chazal understood that Anshe Knesset Hagdolah had a special intention here. And that is that Eretz Yisrael was completely destroyed at the time. Most Jews were not living there. It was not rebuilt yet, right? And as a result of that, if they would have made the takana like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, then, of course, all of Eretz Yisrael would be excluded from it because none of it had walls, and it would give an eternal commemoration to the destruction of Eretz Yisrael. Because Purim, right, for thousands of years, would be celebrated in Eretz Yisrael, even in the places that had a Chaim, only on Yadalad. Why? Because it's a place of Churban. On the other hand, Shushan would become the place of the Chaim. So the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, even when they celebrate Purim, I explained this in last year at length, they made sure to remember and put into the holiday, into the fabric of the holiday, that it's still Galus. It's beautiful, it's great, we're celebrating. As the Gemarah says in Megillah later, why we don't say Halal on Purim, because Akati Avdi Achashverosh Anam, we're still under Achashverosh, and therefore they wanted to give respect to Eretz Yisrael, not give eternal commemoration to its Churban, give respect to it, and therefore they decided what's a Chayma, what's going to be the definition of a Chayma to compare to Shushan? Not a Chayma now, but a Chayma dafka when Yeshua ben Nun came in. So you could look at a city, it has no wall. We say, no. We consider this a city with a wall because when Yeshua ben Nun came into Eretz Yisrael, this had a Chayma. On the other hand, you can have a city with a wall, then it didn't, and it's not considered to have a Chayma.
Well, they still have a problem because Yerushalayim didn't have a wall at the time of Yeshua ben Nun.
Why do you say?
Because Yerushalayim was not... only had a wall at the time of this first Beis HaMikdash.
Also, is this only applicable to the Ir Atikah or outside?
The Monsey Yeshua Benon, I think the old city had.
But outside of the old city, it
It was
doesn't
given
apply.
to Binyamin and it was not.
Why do they read Tesvav?
They ripped this off because they had a wall. They had a wall.
The Knanim, I think. It says that David went, right? David said by the Yevusi to go up on the Chaimah. Frag the Gemarah, Bishlei mit Bishu. Yeah, but I'm saying, but David, when he conquered Yerushalayim, it says clearly it had to be Oila B'Chaimah. So this is before the Beis HaMikdash.
There's a time of David HaMelech where basically he was dwelling in Ir David and he had to go up. And at that time they...
To conquer the Yevusim who were living in Yerushalayim.
So the Choima was actually...
There was some Chaim. Some Chaim over there.
And outside of the old city?
No,
Yerushalayim?
We'll soon see about that. That's going to separate soon. Now I can understand Rabbi Shua ben Karcha doesn't agree with our Tana, the Leslie Prazi. He never had this tradition of Prazi, this Gzeira Shava. And therefore he does not accept it. And generally it says a Gzeira Shava, you have to have a special tradition for it. And Rabbi Shua ben Karcha did not have it, so he didn't accept this Gzeira Shava. Obviously, here the tradition has to come from the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah because this is from the Ksuvim, it's not from the Torah. Elatana Didan, my time Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. We can understand Rabbi Shua ben Karcha very well in terms of logic, in terms of structure. He didn't have the Gzeira Shava. Why does our Tana not agree with Rabbi Shua ben Karcha that you just do Shushan, you do it like Shushan? So he says, my time, Islay Prazi. I don't know. So what do you want from our Tana? He has a Gzeira Shava Prazi. So Hachi Kamer, no, you didn't understand my question. Ela Shushan the of the command, like a praza v'leicha makafim. The paradox comes out that according to our Tana, Shushan is very strange. Because Shushan, how does Shushan do it? According to our Mishnah that you always following Yeshua ben Nun, then Shushan does it on Tesvav. Who are they following? They're not following the Prazim, the open cities, because they do it on Yedalit. Shushan does it on Tesvav. They're also not following the pattern of the Makafim. Because the Makafim are only, they had a Chaim from Yeshua ben Nun, but Shushan never had a Chaim from Yeshua ben Nun. So it's a very, very fascinating phenomenon here. It starts off from Shushan, but the principle of halacha excludes Shushan. Because if Prazi means from Yeshua ben Nun, it had to be open. Yeah, it had to be open. So Shushan was open at the time of Yeshua ben Nun. So that means Shushan should be on your Dalit. But Shushan is not on your Dalit. Shushan is on Tesvav. Like the places that have a chayma. But the places that have a chayma have chaymas from Yeshua ben Nun. Shushan don't have a chayma from Yeshua ben Nun. So that's his question. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, it's perfect. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, the definition is everything is exactly like Shushan. Shushan becomes the source. It had a chayma at the time of Achashverosh. Great, if not, not. But according to our Tana, who creates the Prazi Gzeira Shava and gives a whole new definition of Prazi versus not Prazi, so paradoxically, Shushan becomes excluded of the whole deal. So it would make sense that l'chayda they should do it Yudalit because they didn't have a wall at the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Now, you say, well, how could they do it Yudalit? They celebrated Tesvav, and I'll answer you Parshat. The cities that didn't have a wall at the time of Achashverosh, when did they celebrate? Yudalit. But if they had a Chaim by Yeshua ben Nun, when is their Purim? Tesvav. That means the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah changed it. They made a system. If I lived in a place that didn't have a wall by Achashverosh, right? And I was not in Shushan, or even if it had a wall, but I was not in Shushan. My celebration was Yudalit. I fought Yud Gimel. I celebrated Yudalit. Nonetheless, halachically, if I had a wall by the time of Yeshua, I celebrated Tesvav. That means they're changing the date of my celebration for eternity. So do the same thing with Shushan, maybe. They taka celebrated Tesvav, but once you're doing prazi for whatever reason, put them back into the category of Yudalit. Perhaps. Which is really why it's very strange, right? Because it's starting with Shushan. That's why doesn't our Tana agree with Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? And Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, you don't run into any of these problems. It's very glatt, it's very smooth. Shushan is the place, and it's all about the days of Achashverosh, and Shushan does Tesvav, and everywhere else does Tesvav if they're like Shushan. Our Tana creates a halachic structure that excludes the city from which the whole concept began. You understand? It's like you created the program and then we throw you out of it. You know how that happens? You founded the organization, right? We're all successful and then we take you and throw you out. Nobody would be here without you.
Even if the walls, let's say, of Jerusalem were destroyed, but they didn't destroy the foundations. Some kind of wall is still there. Maybe not the full wall, but it's still the walled city.
Yeah.
He is correct.
Yeah. Okay, and the Sfas Emes adds. The Sfas Emes adds a very nice word. He says, why is the Gemara asking this? What do you want from the Tana? He has prosi. He takes it very seriously. It says prosi. That means that you have to follow the days of Yeshua. He can't accept you saying, why doesn't he believe like Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? He can't. It says prosi. Sfas Emes says he could. He could say that both times are included. Meaning, if you had a Chaim by Yeshua, you're good. If you had a Chaim by Achashverosh, you're also good. That would be very normal. In other words, include, don't exclude. Include and go backwards. If you had a Chaim by Yeshua, I'm good. Even though now you have no Chaim. But if you had a Chaim by Achashverosh and you didn't have a Chaim by Yeshua, you're also good because you're like Shushan. But you're even better because you're like Shushan. No, he doesn't do that. He excludes everybody who didn't have a Chema by Yeshua. Really? So now you know who gets excluded first? Shushan. The boss. The tati of all the Chemas. He gets excluded. Ad kedei kach. Right. In other words, now the Gemarah is understanding really that the whole concept of Chema has nothing to do with Shushan. It has to do with prosi. The definition of prosi is Yeshua. So if it's prosi, then you're Dalit. If it's a Chaima, then Tesvav. If so, you're stuck with a serious issue of Shushan. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav, Rava answered. The Gemara is assuming clearly that Shushan had no Chaima Meis Yeshua ben Nun, or I would add more clearly, the Gemara doesn't know that it had a Chaima Meis Yeshua ben Nun, and you can't say this as a speculation. In other words, Derech Klal, it doesn't have a Chaima, so you're not going to say Allah Safik it had. At least we don't know. Huh? Well, listen, the first year, it says clearly they Prava Tesvav. What happened in the future, the Megillah doesn't say. That's their problem. The Megillah is very silent about fortified cities and Shushan. All the Megillah says is that Mordechai sent a letter to celebrate 2 days. So we know there was a celebration of Tesvav. Our natural logic would be who celebrated Tesvav? Shushan, just like the first year. But we added already all the fortified cities because it says Prozim, do Yudalit. So that means Mukafim. You see, the Gemarah is very, very consistent with the linguistics of the text. The text does say that the Prozim did on Yudalit. That means the Mukafim didn't do Yudalit. The Pasuk also says Shushan originally did Tesvav. So we're taking 2 plus 2 equals 4, and we're making a chalent of all the Mukafim with Shushan and putting it at all in Tesvav. Now, we know the Gemarah spent this analyzing how to do that and why to do that. Maybe that's intellectually dishonest, but the Gemarah was fine with that. But now we're stuck with this last detail here. With Rabbi Shua ben Karcha is good. With our Tana, it's a problem. So Amar Rava answered. Yeah.
The Gezeirah Shevat says that the one didn't accept.
That's an interesting question. Is this an issue of lying? Like Rabbi Shua ben Karcha thinks they all made up a lie? They woke up one morning and they decided to say they had a Gezeirah Shevat? Like, you have to trust your colleagues. Even if you disagree with them, they trusted each other. They understood that everyone is committed to truth, because if not, you can't be one of the Chachamim in the Gemarah. If you're, So he's saying if somebody says I was makabel, why you're not going to believe him? When you think he woke up with he just dreamt it. This is a big question on Gezeirah Shevat. This is a good question. Yeah.
What he was teaching, he knew the fact that it's Gezeirah Shevat, but what do you learn from that Gezeirah Shevat? It's not necessarily black and white, because you can learn both ways.
That's possible. In other words, the Gezeirah Shevat that they had a tradition from is not even the words. I saw this in one of them. I think I saw this from the Vilna Gaon. I have to research it again. I think the Vilna Gaon says this in Sukkah. I have to remember. I have to research it. I saw many years ago, somebody said, I think it was the Vilna Gaon, that the Messiah was that in this Parsha there's a Gzeira Shava. Now you figure out what it was. That's what happened. It's not like it's not like they came to Rabbi Shua ben Koch and they said, listen, we heard this from our Rebbe, heard it from his Rebbe, heard it from his Rebbe, heard it from his Rebbe. It goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, listen. Nobody's accusing anybody of lying, chas v'shalom, because then you could close all these books. I mean, if there was no intellectual honesty, then the whole thing is a waste of time, you understand? The yisoid of any of the Chachamim was a complete commitment to integrity and authenticity and to follow the truth wherever it leads you. You see that throughout Shas. That's the premise. If you're not ready to follow the truth wherever it leads you, you're out. You're out of this party, because then it's just agendas and bias and whatever you like, and you become a manipulator. So there was a Messiah. My Rebbe had a Messiah that in this Parsha there's a Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava. Now you have to figure out which words, you have to figure out, even if you know the words, what's the Gzeira Shava. There could be arguments. I have to research it. Look, I have to find it. It's a very interesting way. Because without it, it's very problematic. Why would anybody reject it? Why would anybody reject it? It's the same word, you can't deny that. So you think it's a mistake? Okay, I'll look it up and I'll tell you the details because I want to be meticulous about it. Amar Rava answered, Va'amri la kedi. And some say that this response was quoted in the Beis Medrash without a particular author. That's what kedi means. Rabbeinu Chananel means kedi means it was not attributed to a particular person. Now, I want to say something very interesting here. The Gemarah is so careful about this. Either it comes from Rava or it doesn't come from Rava. It comes from somehow a consensus in the Beis HaMedrash. Why is that so important? Most people would say, who cares? Rava is a reliable... Rava is the one who explained the whole idea that everybody reads by Tesvav. So it's not just for historical accuracy. It's not Rava who said it. It's also much deeper. Because, and this is something we're not very used to, every one of the Ameirayim and Tanoim had a way of thinking. They didn't just say many things. They had certain paradigms upon which their world revolved, philosophically, psychologically, spiritually, intellectually, and of course, halachically. Each Amoira had his own way of looking at the world. And many of their arguments, even if it's about 100 different topics, can be traced back to that mahalach, like Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, even if it's completely separate sugyas. But if you divest it from the particular incarnation and you get to the germ, the core of the idea, you could see a common denominator. So it's very important to know who said something. Because if Rava said it, that means this idea can be traced back to Rava's way of looking at things. V'amri la kedi, no, it's not a particular Rava idea. That's why it's so important. The Gemarah will always try to get this detail accurately, even though for most people it's like, who cares? But it's very relevant. What did he answer? Shaini Shushan Hoel V'nasa Banes. Meaning, yeah. In other words, don't assume that once we do prazi, we forgot about Shushan. We're just becoming technical, Yeshua ben Nun or not, forget about Shushan. Shushan has its own category because Nasa Banes, meaning, what's Nasa Banes? Nasa Banes doesn't mean there was a nest there. Everywhere there was a nest. The whole Purim was a nest. Nasa Banes means that there was a special miracle over there, that they had permission by the king to continue killing their enemies for a second day. In other words, they had a 2-day miracle rather than a 1-day miracle. Therefore, they rested only on Tesvav. And that's how they made it for generations. So it's irrelevant to the whole Yeshua ben Nun issue. Shushan is Shushan because its Purim was on Tesvav. So when the Knesset Agdola made a holiday for eternity, they chose the day of the original holiday. That's why he doesn't agree with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. He doesn't have to exclude the Yeshua ben Nun thing. Prazi is Yeshua ben Nun. Shushan has a special category of Tes Vav. That's what Rava or Kedi answered. So now, if we assume, what was the question? Obviously, he knew that Shushan had this story. It says in the Megillah, the Gemarah says, that The pshat is, in the question, he thought, I know that Shushan celebrated Tesvav. But just like the Chachamim took all the cities that celebrated on Yud Dalet and made them Tesvav, if they had a wall by Yeshua ben Nun, maybe we should do the same thing to Shushan. Take it from Tesvav, put it on Yud Dalet, and stick to Prazi, because you're doing it anyway with many cities that had a wall by Yeshua ben Nun. They celebrated Yud Dalet, but you're making them do Purim when? On Tesvav. So do the same thing with Shushan, Tapsi-turvy. That was the question of the Gemarah. You're anyway changing days for many cities. That was the question. So the answer is that since Shushan had a special ness, an extra day, in other cities, what are you doing? Instead of your Dalet, they're doing Tesvav to celebrate the Shushan Nes. Fine. So you're almost giving them an extra day. But with Shushan, you want to diminish the Nes and put them back in your Dalet. But Shushan had a special, unique miracle that set it apart from all other cities. And that's why their original holiday was on Tesvav. The Chachamim did not want to, so to speak, delete that, because Shushan had the special warmth, because this is the city where Mordechai lived, and Esther lived, and Achashverosh lived, and Haman ben Amdasa lived, and Vayezasa lived, and Parshandasa lived, and Charvoina lived, and all the Chachmei Achashverosh lived, right? So they had the special, you understand, the Shushan celebrated Purim different than everybody else. For good reason. This is where the action was. This is where Esther Hamalka lived. And they celebrated it originally on Tesvav. So now you're going to delete that and say, no. Just get into the clothes. You're like everybody else. They didn't want to do that to Shushan. So that's why they left Shushan Tesvav. Pashut, but it's because their story. All the other cities now, Prazi, are defined. Now you have to find out why the Anshe Sagdayla put in your Yeshua ben Nun thing. Like, why would they do that? So we explained about Eretz Yisrael, that whole parsha, to give cover to Eretz Yisrael. That's how the Gemarah understands it. Finally, the Gemarah asks one more detail. Let me quote the pasuk. It says, "Vayamim meila niskarim v'nasim b'chol dor v'dor mishpacha medina ir v'ir." Hainu diksiv medina ir v'ir. What's this redundancy in every medina and ir? So we say, well, he wants to just say everywhere, but you could say b'chol medina or b'chol ir. Now, generally, we translate Medina as, we say Medina is a country. In this context, it doesn't mean every country and every city, because if it says every city, it's obviously every country. Every Medina is considered, the Gemarah understands it, as a bigger city that has a wall, so it's like its own province, and every ear is an ear that's open. So according to our Tana, the redundancy is beautiful. B'chol Medina, b'chol ir v'ir. Why? Let's explain. Medina l'chalek b'makafim chayimais Yeshua ben Nun l'makafis chayimais Achashverosh. Medina is because there were two types of fortified cities. There's a fortified city by Yeshua, there's a fortified city by Achashverosh, and there's a different halacha. If you were fortified by Yeshua, Tesvav. If you were fortified by Achashverosh, Yudalet. Very geschmack. But ir v'ir nami l'chalek ben Shushan l'shara yaris. Now I'll tell you why it says ir v'ir. Ir v'ir means cities that don't have a wall. Here, there's also a difference. Because every city that doesn't have a wall does it on Yud Dalet. Shushan, even though it doesn't have a wall from the days of Yeshua, nonetheless, it does it on Tesvav. So we have Medina, ir v'ir, meaning there's a difference in cities that have wall. Depends when the walls. What about ir v'ir? There's a difference in cities that didn't have walls by Yeshua, because Shushan has its own category. Other cities have its own category. The redundancy is perfectly sensible. The Vilna Gaon, in his commentary on Megillah, explains that Medina generally represents a big province, or a big territory, or a self-contained country, or a machaz, like a self-contained region. Therefore, therefore, he says the capital is often called a Medina, the capital of a country, because it's big, it's prominent, and it usually has a wall for protection. And different unfortified cities are connected to it, but the Medina represents like the Ir Habira, the capital with the wall. So based on that, the Gemarah here uses the word Medina in the Megillah. Why would it say Medina Ivir? Medina is the city that has a wall, because when it comes to the Megillah, we only have one distinction. Yes wall, no wall. We don't have any other distinctions. Right? Big city, small city. As a capital, yeah. As a capital. So therefore, according to our Tana, Shushan, which didn't have a wall by Yeshua ben Nun, is like a regular unfortified city. So that means there's a difference between unfortified cities and an unfortified city, because Shushan has its own uniqueness. I'm doing now Rashi's Gersa Lechalek ben Mekafin Chaim Meisa Chashverish L'Shein Mekafin Meisa Chashverish Ela Ir Ve'ir L'Mayasa. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha poses a problem. Medina is very nice. Either you had a wall by Achashverish or you didn't have a wall by Achashverish. I don't care if you had a wall 100 years ago. I don't care if you're going to have a wall in 90 years. Medina. Some have walls from the time of Achashverish, some don't. But Ir ve'ir, what would be the distinction? According to him, any unfortified city does it on Yudalid, and there's absolutely no difference. You understand? You have to understand this question. According to the Tana of our Mishnah, we'll do this and we'll do the answer. According to the Tana of our Mishnah, who says that the issue is if you had a Chaim from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, so Shushan doesn't go into the Medina category, right? Medina if it had a time of Chaim of Yeshua ben Nun, or it didn't have a Chaim of Yeshua ben Nun. So that's the chiluk. Mekafim Chaima, you do Chamesh Asar, or Mekafim Chaim Meisa Chashverish. In other words, there are two types of cities. One had a wall by the Yeshua, one has a wall now. One you read Tesvav, one you read Yudalad. That's Medina. What's Ir ve'ir? Ir ve'ir is, cities that are considered unfortified cities. Why? Because they didn't have a wall by Yeshua ben Nun. Shushan would go into one of them. So therefore you say, but Shushan is different. Why? Because even though it didn't have a wall by Yeshua ben Nun, so therefore you should read it Yudalad. Really, you read it on Tesvav. So I have Medina, Ir ve'ir, because Medina is very important. There's a city with a very big wall, right? And there's a city with no wall, or a wall. And I say, this Medina Yudalad, this Medina Tesvav. Why? This has Yeshua, this doesn't have Yeshua. Okay, so that's Medina. Now I go Ir ve'ir. I look at all the cities that are considered unfortified from the days of Yeshua, and that includes Shushan. And it should all be Yudalad. But I say, no, Shushan is Tesvav. So that's the Medina, Ir ve'ir. Medina is distinguishing the two types of cities with walls. But one has a wall long enough and one doesn't have a long wall long enough. One gets Tesvav, one gets Yudalad. Very good. Now what about Ir ve'ir? Ir ve'ir is giving me a new category because Shushan should have been in the second Medina category that reads Yudalad because it didn't have a wall by Yeshua ben Nun. It's considered an Ir without a wall in terms of halacha. Nonetheless, Ir ve'ir, it has its own category. But according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Medina means it had a wall by Achashverish, didn't have a wall by Achashverish. No, what's Ir ve'ir? Any unfortified city that doesn't have a wall by Achashverish, you read Yudalad. There's a city that's unfortified that gets Tesvav? According to the Artana, Shushan. But according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, the Ir ve'ir is redundant. So the Gemarah answers, Amalach Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Let me answer you. Ulatana de don minicha, and according to our Tana, you do have an answer. Kivan de islay prazi medina lamali. If he already has a Gzeira Shava prazi, which teaches me that if it has a wall from Yeshua, you read on Tesvav, what do you need medina? You already have the redundancy. They have the words prazi to teach me when to read. In which city? What do you need Medina? Let's say Medina makes sense, but it's a redundancy because you already know. Ella krala drasha das. The pshat is that the pasuk came to teach me a drasha. What's the drasha? Kid Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Yudas. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said a fascinating halach. Krach, a city that has a wall. V'chol hasamuchloi, and any city that's nearby, even if you can't see it, but it's right nearby. Or v'chol hanirimai, or another city that's maybe not right nearby, but you could see it from the city that has the wall. Nidoin kikrach. Both of these scenarios, the nearby city or the city that I could see from where I am standing in my fortified city, has the same halacha like the fortified city, and they celebrate Purim on Tesvav Adar. That's pshat, Ir ve'ir. Ir ve'ir means city and another city. What's another city? Sometimes it's a city that doesn't have a wall, but I judge it like the city that does have a wall. In other words, besides the Medina itself, every Ir, call Ir ve'ir. There could be a city and another city which doesn't have a wall. Ear that's close, even though I can't see it, or ear that I could see, even though it's not close, and it gets drawn in and swallowed up by the Medina, and therefore I read the Megillah over there on Tesvav, and therefore you explain Medina, ear ve'ear, according to the first shit of the Tana. Yeah, why does it say Medina? You'll explain it according to me as well. Now, we can understand also the concept here, right? Why is Rabbi Shua ben Levi making such a halacha? It's very simple. If you live in an unfortified city and you know there's going to be an attack tomorrow, you run into your neighbor. You're not so vulnerable. They ran in. Because they weren't so exposed, so they ran into them. So therefore their danger wasn't so powerful. So therefore, they made for them Purim the same day that they made for the fortified cities. So therefore Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, just as you explained it according to, Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says, the text works with me just like it works with the Tana, and therefore he maintains his perspective about the Chaim being only Mimaisa Chashverish.
What does he do with it? It says Kishushan, so it's not. It's just the city outside.
No, if it's like Shushan, that it had a wall by Achashverosh.
No, but he said even the city next door.
And therefore, the whole
Yeah.
Yerushalayim,
Rabbi Shua ben Levi says,
inside and
yeah.
out.
So any city that's nearby, or you could see it, has the same status of the original city.
I can see the old city from my apartment.
Yeah? Okay.
See Har, but more important, I can see Har Bayis
Wow. Which neighborhood?
in Arnona.
Verstanden? Understood? Kol hanira imay. Yeah, kol hanira imay. So that's a machlokes of the Rishonim. What's that kol hanira imay? The Meiri says that it's not enough that you see the other city, but rather the whole shetach of the entire city you have to be able to see from within your city. The Meiri is very stringent. From the city with the wall, when I look, I could see the whole shetach. Not just I see another city. I have to be able to see the whole shetach. Yeah. Some say nira imay means that if you're looking from far, they look like one city. It looks like it's mechuber. Yeah. Some say the Ritva says that kol nira imay means that they work together. They're like they participate. Yeah. They're subservient to it. Some say that in the first condition, you don't only see like the roofs or the towers or tall house. You have to see the shetach itself. So some are not so makbid. That's a machlokes Rishonim. What's the word? So Megillah Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says you're explaining Medina according to Tanakama. Because why does it say Medina? We already know from Prazi. But you're explaining Medina to Tanakama according to Rabbi Shua ben Levi that besides the Medina, right, any ear that's connected to it becomes part of it. So therefore, according to me, I also have no problem. That's how he's answering it.
How are you going to explain it?
You could see it. You could see the yishuv that doesn't have a wall from the krach. It's nira, imay, from the krach. Nira, it's seeing imay with him. Or from him. In other words, when I'm not there, of course I could see it. I can go in. Nira imay, with him I could see that. In other words, when I'm inside of him, I could see him. Yeah, I could see him.
Also a city that's close that you can't see.
Or it's close and you can't see. There's a few details in halacha about that. We'll see tomorrow when we learn. There is also one of the Rishonim who says Taisvus that Medina is actually explained like we explained it before. Cities that have a wall from the time of Achashverosh to cities that don't have a wall in the time of Achashverosh. According to Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, according to our Tana, Yeshua ben Nun and not Yeshua ben Nun. And Ir ve'ir are basically the cities that are close or the cities that are seeing. So that's how it works. Medina, we hold on to the old Pirish. And Ir ve'ir, we're adding. That would be another pshat in the Gemarah, how he's answering the question. Medina is like we used to say, and Ir ve'ir, we're just adding this element.
Even though it's a different city, it's a different thing, since it's close.
Right. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Psuris Tovus.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.